It's now my great pleasure to introduce Deputy Commissioner Gary Worboys from the New South Wales Police Force. Deputy Commissioner Gary Worboys is currently in his 38th year with the New South Wales Police Force. Since May 2017, Gary has served in the position of Deputy Commissioner Regional Field Operations, and in this role Gary is responsible for generalist and investigative policing, including the administrative support for all cities, towns and villages outside the recognised metropolitan area of Greater Sydney. He's worked in many locations, including remote areas of Western New South Wales, larger regional cities, snow, coastal locations and many border cities and towns. He spent many years in tactical and weapons work in country New South Wales and been at the forefront of a number of complex emergency management events. He currently leads New South Wales Police Force on rural crime, remote and isolated policing, and most recently youth and capability. He is the State Emergency Operations Controller, and we're very pleased to have him here today. So thank you very much, Gary, and welcome.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I guess I always say when you peel all of that back, I just love policing, I love country New South Wales, and I'm a very good listener to the issues that are right across country New South Wales. One of those is, of course, around the issues of rural crime. Thank you so much, Uncle Colin, for that warm welcome. I've been up on your country before and I always feel very happy to be here and warmly welcome. So thank you. It makes it so much easier for policing to have good support and be here and know that we can also be a part of your community too. So thank you, Colin. So I guess today, in a short time, what could I tell you folks that would be of interest? So if we went back in history just a little way before I took on the role of Deputy Commissioner for Regional New South Wales, we pretty much had this response to rural crime that was about rural crime detectives. They were just called rural crime investigators. And whilst they were incredibly knowledgeable people, if you wanted to muster a station on horseback, or if you actually had a high-level theft that they could get some support into and get some good, strong evidence around it and get released from normal CI duty, which was always incredibly difficult. These sorts of jobs and this response to rural crime, as we called it, was always problematic and difficult. And that was in no way a criticism of Assistant Commissioner Jeff McKechnie, who's our sponsor for this at Assistant Commissioner level out of Dubbo, who tried so very, very hard with a whole range of workshops and forums to get this up and running. And Minister Grant, who was the Police Minister back a couple of years ago, sort of said, well, why don't we have a real red-hot go at this? And how are we going to do that? We're going to put a Deputy Commissioner in for Regional New South Wales. And as a result of that, we are really going to see how we can put these teams together. And it was really something that I was very strong about, that we couldn't leave people in isolation and expect them to do work and jobs that come in and that was filtered very much before they got there, that we had to build a team of people with a capability and a resourcing where we could actually start to do something about the problems of rural crime. So with Commissioner Fuller, the advent of rural crime prevention teams, because we're very much about, it's really nice to be able to chase people and put them before courts and try and get sentences that were commensurate with those crimes for rural people. But if we could start to prevent some of that, if we could actually disrupt some of that, as well as sharpen our response to it, we would be doing these communities, whether out in remote New South Wales or in some of our large regional cities, we would start to get a tiered approach to rural crime. So we brought on rural crime prevention teams. We got a structure in there with detective sergeants and investigators. We had 3 analysts appointed to that position. And we also have a detective inspector who is the coordinator that sits under the corporate sponsor to put some of that power behind dealing with the movement of resources that's needed across country New South Wales. In that then, over the next 4 years, 18 more positions for rural crime prevention teams. And we're only just starting now to realise how we can actually bring these people out of generalist policing and put together operations where they can actually target people who over generations have always stolen the diesel, have always cut the fences, have always gone onto properties through sheds, have always stolen firearms. It's not uncommon for people in country towns to tell me when I arrive and talk to them about this sort of thing, we know the people who are committing these crimes. And when you talk to them a little bit further, my experience at Lightning Ridge is that we not only know the people, but their father did it and the father before them, their grandfather did it as well. And what are we as policing then doing around that? We're sort of waiting for a crime to occur and then we're trying our best to grab someone and put them before the courts. So I thought it was really something where we could turn a corner. And are we there yet? No, we are a long way away from that idea of a true link to intelligence around generations of theft and mischief in country towns. But we have truly turned a corner in that regard. And what we have now is a group of people that are pulled away from generalist policing, that are starting to grab intelligence and information and actually do something about it. We have, over the last 12 months, run over 40 operations. So that's just not one or two police officers going out and actually trying to resolve a crime, but actually an operation where we're grabbing people, putting them together as a team, getting pieces of information and intelligence, having a look at where we can have an impact on that. And whether it's some of the larger events where we've had people droving stock on stock routes for many, many years in generations, collecting cattle along the way, having stolen firearms and drugs with them, destroying fences, stealing fuel along the way. We've done a tremendous job in relation to that. And lo and behold, we find that it's not just this person in this caravan that has these stolen firearms, that's gathered these stock and other pieces of machinery, that's never ever bought diesel. But his father before that did exactly the same thing. And we let these people run up and down, and it's almost like, in some respects, collateral damage for decent people, for farmers, to expect that to occur as people move up and down these stock routes. And if we don't put together these sorts of operations to do that, well, then we find that it just goes on and on and on. And I think that we've really shown over the last 12 months that by putting these teams together, by gathering information and intelligence and actually going to these places and doing really, really good hard police work around it, that we're finding that some of the credibility for country policing, for the rural crime prevention teams, is really starting to go through the roof. And I'm very much proud about that, and I don't back away from that. But we certainly have more to go. We had a response the other day. If we talk about response, which I think we've sharpened, but out at Cobar, where a family rang up and said that there's people on my property. They're 150 kilometres out of town. The crew went out to that road, stopped a car or a four-wheel drive on the way back in. There were evidence of shooting. There were evidence of, again, stolen firearms, unregistered firearms, drugs, and the vehicle itself was later confiscated. So some of the areas that government has intervened and given us some more powers in relation to that are so pivotal in sending that message to people. If you want to go out onto someone else's land and cut their fence and drive through and shoot wild pigs and grab goats, or in fact take animals off their property that they should be legitimately selling and living off that as a farming entity, that there's going to be a chance that it's not just the rural crime prevention team, but any police officers we're encouraging to respond to that and know their power and their ability. We've trained over 400 generalist police in first level rural crime prevention techniques. So those sorts of things in terms of response are really, really passionate and something that's near and dear to me, because I really do think that so often people in country New South Wales pick up the phone and they seem to get this response that it's good enough tomorrow or the next day or next week or sometimes not at all, that we really need to hone in on the fact that if people need our help, whatever time of day or night, and there's a person particularly that's committed a crime, that we should be able to respond to that there and then. So the response side of things is really important. You get then down the other end to prevention, And we've really made our social media work for us. We've really tried very hard, not just to be at the 2 or 3 top field days, but to be in lots of places with our rural crime prevention team, from the Easter show right out to the Henty field days, to Mudgee small field days, to other community events where we can have our people stand, listen and talk to people like you, people who are interested in safety in rural communities. And we've then really tried very hard to put that not just, if we can, in the land, but also on social media, in local papers and everywhere in between, to try and address that generation of communication that we know some people are really happy now just to hop into their iPad or their laptop and get the information. Other people are still getting the land delivered, and routinely each edition go through from front to back cover. And we need to cover all of that in terms of our prevention space and what we're doing. Of course, the other thing that we really need to do is increase our visibility in that prevention area, and that is in partnership with a whole range of people. But again, those operations that I talk about, we talk so much about target hardening, which is a really, I think, a word that to me, I would much rather talk about people to be aware of the context, their surroundings. How do we go to a place where a farm and a farming family that live quite remotely every day are going to lock up every piece of machinery, are going to lock up every fuel drum, are going to lock up their shed and their house, and they've probably never had keys to any of that before and never intend to. But what's really apparent to us is that there's some different things that people can do, and that is a lot of our farming community are so happy to invest in CCTV, signage. They are so happy to protect crime scenes, so much better for us, and we've got to get much better at getting out there and taking that evidence away, because each and every one of these crimes, so often the local people, when you get around, know who actually committed that. Who are the people, the family, that every single night drive down that track and look for opportunities to steal stuff and cause mischief. So in terms of that prevention space and the disruption space, we can do so much more to try and look at these people in a much different way. Instead of waiting for crimes to happen, we can actually get out there, we can put our, if you want, our stamp on the fact that we're very interested in these crimes and these communities. We can actually start to talk to farmers about how they can better protect their assets and indeed country people in general. And then if you get into that disruption part of it, well then those rural crime prevention teams, I'm really trying hard to make sure that the analysts grab every piece of information and we actually get to the point where we go out and actually proactive talk to people who we know are committing those crimes and are up to mischief. So disrupting the activity before it happens is really also quite important to us, or those people that we know that habitually go out and commit those crimes. This centre here is very important to us because traditionally, I guess, we've looked at some of those crimes that have been around for decades, but if we only sort of start to think about where we head with our rural crime prevention teams, the theft of water and the misappropriation of water is going to be a huge issue. The use of drones or remotely piloted aircraft is going to be a huge issue, both in the positive and the negative side of things. CCTV is going to be a huge issue for us and how we gather information off those devices and process that and what we actually do with that, and give people confidence if they're going to invest in some sort of security system that we're interested in that and we'll do something with that. The technology space of it is I guess, where us as an organisation, as a Deputy Commissioner, as a rural crime prevention team across this state, need to start partnering and asking questions about how this might occur. The identification of stock is something that, for so long we've spoken about how we might ear tag and brand and mark and all of those sorts of things. But we already know that there's evidence there's technology there that the facial recognition of cattle is well and truly advanced. And my Commissioner, he would say to me, please, Gary, please, let's not step off and get that sorted in terms of facial recognition of cattle when we're still struggling with human beings. But what we know is that it's there, the technology is there, and it's quite accurate to just run cattle through and actually use some of this technology and also some of the electronic tagging and so forth and so on. And only just now we're sort of thinking or talking to a lot of people about the equine industry with the horses. We know that right up this end of it, the thoroughbreds very much. If you lose one of those, if one's stolen, we know that we can trace an owner. You get right down this end and there are so many horses that are still valuable to farmers that if they go, that we have no idea how to trace some of that branding and some of that way back. So there's a whole heap in between that that makes it also more expensive, and we have to be very balanced in the terms of when we start to think about some of these things, how they actually impact on people that might not necessarily need that or be able to afford that. So there's a lot to think about. There is no doubt about that. This sort of opportunity here that we see today is really something that our people are more than happy and have been to step into, to be a part of, even if it's just a small part in how actually these people think. So I talk about information, I talk about our analysts that grab that, I talk about the intelligence, but why do these people do this? Why do we have some towns that have so many people that just want to steal and cause mischief, when we go to other towns and they're relatively safe and quiet in that regard? So I'm also interested in some of that social maturity or immaturity of towns and why some move on and some don't. How that technology is going to really impact on policing and our rural crime prevention teams into the future, and how, I say quite simply, I've probably got enough. I've got enough rural crime investigators that can ride a horse and go about mustering a property or working a sale yard. But how many do I have when we get that really, really big inquiry about the misappropriation of water or the theft of water? We're going to struggle a little bit there, and we need to prepare ourselves in that regard. So we need to look towards the future. I think this is very much about a future partnership, and I really do look forward to assisting and being a part of it wherever we can. So thank you.